Kyiv is reeling from what authorities describe as a massive Russian attack on the Ukrainian capital overnight. The state emergency service confirms that 9 people have been killed and more than 60 injured, including 6 children. A combined wave of missile and drone strikes collapsed residential buildings and ignited fires. Authorities say rescuers are still searching for people buried under the rubble. DW Special Correspondent Nimisha Jaiswal is in Kyiv. Nimisha, tell us more about these latest Russian attacks.
Well, Terry, it seems like Kyiv was the main target and it was a terrifying night here. But we do know that there were also strikes in Zhytomyr and Kharkiv, in Sumy, Poltava, Zaporizhia, and across the country, air raid alerts blared from 5 to 7 hours, including in the west, because the takeoff of strategic bombers means that really fast ballistic missiles could hit anywhere in the country overnight. But here in Kyiv, we had massive loud explosions starting at 1 a.m. as air defense got to work. Rescue workers rushed to sites where there were collapsed buildings, and even though there were warnings about more strikes early in the morning, which did come between 3 and 5 a.m., and this has been a pattern. A rescue worker was actually injured in Zhytomyr because of a double tap strike, and people were talking about hearing phone calls from under the rubble. Now, this, of course, at a time when people on social media here also saying that this is Russia responding to American encouragement.
Indeed, Nimisha, these Russian attacks come just hours after U.S. President Donald Trump accused Ukraine of jeopardizing a potential peace deal. Trump lashed out at Volodymyr Zelenskyy for saying he would never recognize Russia's control of Crimea, which it annexed in 2014. Here's an excerpt from a Truth Social post that Trump published last night. He said, "It's inflammatory statements like Zelensky's that make it so difficult to settle this war. He can have peace or he can fight for another 3 years before losing the whole country." And before that post, Trump's Vice President J.D. Vance had urged Ukraine to accept Russia's territorial gains. Let's listen to this.
I think everybody has been negotiating in good faith, but it's now time, I think, to take, if not the final step, one of the final steps, which is at a broad level, the parties saying, we're going to stop the killing, we're going to freeze the territorial lines at some level close to where they are today, and we're going to actually put in place the kind of long-term diplomatic settlement that hopefully will lead to long-term peace.
Nimisha, how is Ukraine responding to these statements from the U.S. administration?
Well, Terry, understandably with frustration. Their president is being blamed for extending the killing fields, in Trump's words, when he was not the man who decided to invade another country, and they are staying awake at night being hit by Russia's strikes, and Zelenskyy is being blamed for extending the war. Now, of course, I do want to point out that President Trump in the same post said nobody's asking Zelenskyy to give up Crimea, but reiterated that he doesn't have the cards. His press secretary repeated that thing, that comment about nobody is asking him to give up Crimea, but says that Trump is frustrated that Zelenskyy is litigating this war in the press. But at the same time, I do want to point out the contrast to reactions from when things come out from Russia. Just yesterday, Russian spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told European media that if Ukraine withdraws from 4 regions, then the war would come to an immediate end. This doesn't seem to be a problem. When on Palm Sunday, Russian strikes killed over 30 civilians, this was called a mistake by Trump. When Putin outright rejected a 30-day ceasefire that the U.S. and Ukraine had agreed on, this was called a productive conversation by Trump. So clearly the double standards are really stunning, and there's a lot of anger and frustration here as Ukrainians stay awake at night once again because of massive strikes across their country.
Nimisha, thank you very much. That was DW Special Correspondent Nimisha Jaiswal in Kyiv. Well, as Russia attacks Ukraine's capital, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has arrived in South Africa, his first visit to an African nation since the war began. His invitation is being seen as a shift in Pretoria's stance on the conflict after initially refusing to condemn Russia's invasion. Earlier this month, South Africa joined a UN General Assembly resolution criticizing Russia over the war for the first time. South Africa is a member of the BRICS group of nations with strong ties to Russia, and Ukraine is hoping that its influence and experience may help put pressure on the Kremlin.
Since the fall of apartheid, South Africa has built a reputation as Africa's economic powerhouse and a defender of universal human rights. The country's constitution is seen as one of the most progressive in the world, enshrining dignity and freedom for all. And South Africa promotes these values on the international stage too.
Because of its track record, because of its moral authority, and also because they opted for negotiations, for talking and resolving conflict in that manner. And it's something that South Africa has been exporting over the 30 years of democracy.
Just last year, South Africa approached the International Court of Justice to challenge Israel's actions in Gaza, accusing the government of violating international law. Volodymyr Zelenskyy hopes South Africa will now use its influence to help mediate in Russia's war in Ukraine, and the government in Pretoria has signalled it's willing.
That moral authority stands, and I think that's why the South African government feels that it can indeed play a role within the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Analysts say South Africa is well placed to negotiate with Moscow. The two countries have a long-standing relationship and are both members of BRICS, a powerful group of countries working to increase the global economic influence of developing nations.
I think Zelenskyy is fully aware that South Africa is part of BRICS and has been for a number of years. If anything, this is the value that President Ramaphosa actually brings to the table, in the sense that because we are part of an alliance structure such as BRICS, and because we have friendly relations with the Russian Federation, it is better for President Ramaphosa to take matters directly to President Putin and say, this is what Zelenskyy is putting on the table, these are some of their concerns, and so on and so forth.
While Ukrainians in South Africa don't hold much hope that Pretoria can end the war completely, they think that President Ramaphosa could successfully push Moscow on specific issues.
South Africa has an opportunity to play a mediation role in the field of returning of Ukrainian forcefully deported children, also on helping stop tortures at the Ukrainian-occupied nuclear power station in Zaporizhia.
If and when South Africa's government chooses to take on the role of mediating between Ukraine and Russia, it will need to use all the diplomatic skills it can muster.
And DW correspondent Dianne, who filed that report, joins us now from Pretoria. That's where the presidents of South Africa and Ukraine are due to meet later today. Dianne, South Africa had previously taken a neutral position in the Ukraine war. Does this visit by Ukraine's president signal a diplomatic shift for the country?
Well, I would say that the visit is quite in line with that neutral stance, with South Africa saying it doesn't want to overtly kind of lean towards either the Russian side or the Ukrainian side. And the only way to really show that you're neutral is to have engagements with both countries. Now, South Africa engages quite regularly with Russia through the BRICS forum. It hasn't had a strong relationship with the Ukraine government up until now. And since 2023, when African leaders met in Kyiv with President Zelenskyy, there was a promise that relations will improve, but there wasn't any movement on that promise. And now today we're seeing the first example of that movement of South Africa reaching out to Ukraine and Ukraine reciprocating.
What about the timing of this? Why is this visit by Ukraine's president happening now?
I think the timing is quite interesting, considering that Ukraine and Russia are at a stage where there are tentative talks about whether there could be any kind of ceasefire, which is being mediated by the United States. South Africa has been talking to both governments, doing various telephone calls with their foreign ministers about the situation in Ukraine. And I think that there is a sense of urgency now amongst world leaders to try and get some kind kind of deal when it comes to the war in Ukraine. On the part of President Zelensky, this visit could offer an opportunity to send a message to the Russian government via South Africa on certain issues that they might want to address. We understand the issue of the children who are, have been taken from Ukraine to Russia is quite a big concern for the Ukrainian government and, of course, for Ukrainians. And that's one of the things that they would like the South African government to put on the table as part of a possible discussion about reaching some kind of deal.
So do you expect this meeting between the Ukrainian and South African leaders could have an impact on the course of the war in Ukraine?
It's very difficult to say what the impact would be, since it is the first meeting of its kind. And of course, these governments are saying that the main focus is on trade. But there's a lot of subtext in the meeting, and there is an expectation that after the issues of trade are discussed, the issue of the war and whether South Africa can play any role in resolving it is likely to come onto the table. Of course, Ukraine would like to do more trade with other African countries. It has said that it wants to also open up more embassies on the African continent, so it is pushing in that direction. But it's difficult to think about trade when there's security issues within the country. And the expectation is that it will request that South Africa does some work behind the scenes to help as much as it can to bring about some kind of a discussion with Russia, or at least some small concessions here and there.
Dianne, thank you very much. That was DW correspondent Dianne Hawker in Pretoria.